India has had an incredible journey in the foreign policy realm in the last 10 years. A large part of it is because of India's increasing standing as an economic powerhouse, as a strategically important player, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. But there is also a moral, spiritual, civilizational argument as to why Bharat matters. That Bharat is a civilizational state, that for thousands of years it was the premier nation amongst the great civilizations of the world. And of course, throughout history, because of colonialism, various invasions, it's lost much of that sheen and power. And what we are seeing now is a revival of that civilizational state. So to try and understand why Bharat matters, I'm now joined by a very special guest, the author of this new book, Why Bharat Matters, and the Honorable External Affairs Minister of India, Dr. S Jaishankar. Congratulations on your new book. It's the second book that you've written. What is the compelling need for an incumbent minister, a sitting minister, to write a book?
Well, I think there are two reasons. One, if one looks back at the last 10 years, I think there's been a very profound transformation of the country itself and of our foreign policy as well. It's not always that obvious, especially on the foreign policy side, because a lot of people have ingrained habits of how to approach it. So as someone involved in that exercise, I felt it's useful to explain it, to put out what really has been different. A lot of it is exactly what you said in your opening remarks, which is really the a bigger place on the global stage for a civilizational state. The other part of it is actually very practical, which is, in a globalized world, foreign policy matters more and more to the average citizen. That things which happen in far corners of the world impact our lives directly. They can be problems, anxieties, there could be opportunities. So you could have something like the COVID or, energy crisis, or you could have today the global workplace. So, when people go out, what kind of backup do they get from their country? So because foreign policy matters increasingly to everybody, at the same time, the world is changing, India is changing. I thought the combination of the two, in a sense, mandated a book, and that's really the reason.
So I do want to talk about the book. So in this book, Why Bharat Matters, you're referencing or using the Ramayana as a tent pole to look at India's foreign policy journey over the last 75 years. In your first book, The India Way, you referenced portions of the Mahabharata.
Yes.
So why the Ramayana, and why are you looking at India's foreign policy through that prism?
Well, if the purpose of a book is to communicate, and particularly because in this particular case, I'm trying to communicate to not necessarily specialists or academics or foreign policy people, but a world beyond that look, foreign policy matters, don't switch off when it appears on your radar. Then you need to communicate something to which people will easily relate. Now, the fact is, often to people whose lives have been spent in foreign policy, everything is self-evident, everything is interesting. But to a lot of people, it's not. That it's very arcane. They may not necessarily understand the complexities. I mean, they may not be bothered with a lot of this. So I wanted to use a set of metaphors and analogies and narratives to which any Indian would easily relate. So, they're not to be taken literally.
Sure,
obviously.
of course.
But if you say, if you look today at the world and say, well, sometimes you can have a major power which is very, which is overconfident. You have the example of Ravan, who feels he's invulnerable except he has chinks in his armor. And human the human race is one of the important things. Or the idea of actually creating, having friends, building relationships, creating coalitions, to deal with complex problems. Or frankly, the very idea of diplomacy, that, diplomacy is not something which, people who necessarily, first of all, it is not something which is modern. It is as old as the human race. Two, it's a skill of a very complex kind. So if you give an example which people relate to, and I would say perhaps in the last year, more than any other analogy I have made, the Hanuman as a diplomat, I think, has resonated with a lot of people here. So I must say there's a lot of trial and error in the, by the time I actually wrote the book, which is a lot of it came out of interactions with people, especially with younger people. And we are talking about something, and I say, do you know something like this? I'm giving you Hanuman as an example, but there could be others. The power of knowledge, the fact that at various points of time, in fact, I've approached Vibhishan not in the traditional manner as a defecting brother, but actually as a source of knowledge. That he's actually someone who has critical moments when the things are going badly. He's actually able to come up with exactly the right inputs.
So one of the analogies, again, it's not a literal analogy, but you've used in the book, is about the 4 sons of Dashrath and how you're comparing that to the Quad countries. So what does that, I'm again looking at the sort of philosophical reasoning that here are 4 countries whose interests may not all the time align, but in critical areas align, and therefore they bring themselves together for what is a larger objective.
Well, I put it again here. This one is very definitely not to be taken literally.
Sure.
And I made my point here was to illustrate a certain comfort of shared traditions, of shared values, of shared systems to some degree, and the point is, today, as we become bigger and we count more in the calculations of others, our interests are greater, and we too need more partners. Then I think diplomatically we face a very different situation, which is who do you work with on which issue, and you can't get. We are not one of those allied countries who have tied our fortunes to other people. So we have to constantly make that judgment. So depending on the situation, depending on the issue, depending, frankly, on the interests of others, and naturally of ourselves. So I make that reference to purely as a comfort level factor. In fact, I make another reference, which is that there are countries, in this particular case, I have mentioned how Ravan sends a sorcerer to break up Lord Ram's alliance, that he tries to sow divisions. So this is part of international relations as well, Avid.
So I do want to ask you, because we are here, there's a momentous occasion happening very soon. The Ram Mandir in Ayodhya is going to get inaugurated. What I referenced in the introduction about Bharat and a civilizational state reclaiming its lost glory. Explain this moment, the inauguration of the Ram Mandir, the Pran Pratishtha, what this means for Bharat as a civilizational state. Explain it like you would to a foreigner, let's say.
Well, a lot of people outside our country are following it as well.
Yeah.
Because to me, in many ways, this is a hugely important moment. It is a moment when we are actually expressing our self-confidence, that we are no longer defensive about what we are, where we came from, what are our traditions and beliefs. Because somewhere, this is a debate in itself. What happened with us, we are not unique, it has happened with some other countries as well. People took the quest for progress and modernity as also a rejection of our own traditions and heritage. You know, some other countries have had them. So particularly in Asia, we've had countries with this situation. Even I mean, it's interesting on a matter of faith. I mean, you know, I studied political science. So among things we did for a degree was actually you went through the debates in the Constituent Assembly and you know what did you could say like the founding fathers and such. So as a very pluralistic country, pluralistic in every sense, it is natural, it is right that people agreed that there would be equal respect for
of all
faiths or all traditions, or in a sense equal respect for the pluralistic character of our society. But equal respect then for reasons of politics, in a sense became a kind of defensiveness about one's own beliefs and faiths, you know. And I think over a period of time, the people of this country have reacted to it. Now, you asked me a very interesting question. How would you explain it to a foreigner? How do the foreigners view it? Look at it from a foreigner's point of view. If a country or a leadership or a nation or a society is itself constrained and hesitant to express its personality, why would you respect it? So that's why, to me, this is a very important moment of expressing, you know, what we are, where we came from. It is a positive expression. It's not a negative one. And I think much of the world will take it in that spirit.
I do want to ask that. I mean, this is a political question. You said you're a student of political science, but the opposition is making this whole thing out to be like a political party's function or Mr. Modi's function, and therefore they're boycotting it. So what would you say to that?
I think people, you and I both live in this country. You can see today the enthusiasm in this country. And I don't think that enthusiasm is necessarily just political. I think people, all of us have people around us, who are not political people in that sense. You know, ask the people with whom you have a daily rub in your lives. You know, are they excited about it? Do they get the importance of it? And I think you will see it as so. So I think there's a genuine today feeling in this country about what is happening, and I think to make it appear political is really in a way to trivialize it.
You talked about historic hesitations, and if we are not proud of who we are, then how is the world going to take us seriously? In your book, you look at arguably 3 important bilateral relationships that India has had over the years, with Pakistan, with China, with the United States. And you have referenced how some of these historic hesitations, some of the words you've used is naivete when it comes to the relationship with Pakistan, rose-tinted approach when it comes to China, and a certain suspicion when it comes to the United States. And all of this can be characterized as this historic hesitation. If our foreign policy were more true to who we were and who we are, how would those decisions have been different? And what would you say to the fact that you can say this now 75 years later with the benefit of hindsight, but maybe at that time, those were the best informed decisions?
You know, I have struggled with exactly that point for many years. which is why I decided to write that one chapter, The Roads Not Taken. Because I wanted to show, look, this is not a deeply researched academic book. It's a set of arguments to make people think, debate, differ, criticize. I mean, all of which I think is very, very good. Now, in The Roads Not Taken, I deliberately got into this problem because I wanted to show that on these three key issues, Pakistan, China, and US, it's not today in 2024 that we are saying, oh, the people in the 50s got it wrong. In the 50s, in real time, as it was happening, members of the cabinet were differing. They were saying, look, don't do this. We disagree with you on this. Look at the consequences of that. So, if you take Pakistan, for example, I mean, you have someone like Shama Prasad Mukherjee who's saying very clearly that you are treating Pakistan as though it's a state like you. I mean, this is a state which is not going to live up to the Nehru-Liaquat Pact. That the nature of the polity is such that they're going to actually squeeze the minorities. So why are you doing this thing? Or if you look at China, I mean, this is something which starts from 1950, that this exchange of views between Patel and Nehru. And not just that, I mean, the fact is we took up China's cause with a gusto and an enthusiasm which was inexplicable, because it was not very clear what we got out of it. Because certainly I would approach foreign policy as, okay, I'm willing to speak up for a country or a relationship, but there must be something in it for me. I mean, I'm a country, I'm not a charity. The second is we pushed it to a point where we actually alienated the United States. So where is the merit of that? I have no problem alienating any country in pursuit of my own interest. But to alienate another country in pursuit of a third country's interest is very strange. So, and even with the US, look, it's a bit of a chicken and egg. Was the US unreasonably suspicious of India? Did we, in many ways, also, take steps or take positions which somewhere aggravated the ties? But the fact is, again, from Dr. Ambedkar to Sardar Patel, there were people who were very uncomfortable with what they viewed as an unnecessary alienation of the United States at that particular point of time. So, I would say today, and I think in any country's development, it is necessary every few years. And, I can imagine 20 years later, somebody would be reviewing this period and be saying things. I think they're completely, rightfully allowed to do so. That's how countries grow. But if we make policies into cult worship, no, you can't, say a word against non-alignment, you should not criticize Nehru, you should not do this. If you do this, that shows you are being very political. Mine is a foreign policy audit. It's not a political diatribe. So my point is that at that time there were choices. Choices were exercised. I'm not saying, some were good, some were not so good. I think it's natural in the evolution of any society to introspect. After all, we do it in our personal lives, and to learn the lessons.
So, I come back to this whole, regaining the lost glory of a civilizational state, that Bharat has always been a civilizational state. China also makes that claim, that they are a civilizational state. So in this day and age, where the world is beset by multiple wars and conflicting interests, is there space for the ideas of two civilizational states, or will a clash only be inevitable?
No, I look again. The fact is, the world was composed of multiple civilizations.
Yeah.
Then you had a period of distortion where one civilization accumulated so much power that it was able to wipe out many others and subjugate a whole lot, and this was the European Western civilization. So the idea that there should be multiple civilizations is not an anomaly. It is the natural state of affairs. Let us say, had the Europeans not had that age of imperialism, today there would have been 9-10 civilizational states.
Yeah.
Many of them have eroded, some of them beyond recall in a way. So I don't think to have multiple influences and multiple centers and is a problem. I think it's a good thing. I think that's how you get a balancing in the world. That said, I think each one would bring to the world their own particular strong points. In our case, if you look at it, we have never been insular. On the contrary, our footprint goes all the way both to East Africa, Gulf and East Africa on one side, through Southeast Asia up to actually the east coast of China. Even today in Fujian there are temples of Indian origin. In Vietnam, in central Vietnam, you see that, and right along the way. And we have always, in different ways, kind of contributed to the global mix. That's been our tradition. We were never the remote, closed place where others with great difficulty came. I think there's a fundamental openness about us, a fundamental plurality about us, which is a source of strength. So I would argue today that we speak about economic rebalancing, which is how the G20 in a way came about. We speak about political rebalancing, which is why we today envisage a multipolar world. I think one important one important aspect, and we are entering that era, is cultural rebalancing. That even today, if you look, the Western cultural dominance is still much greater, even though its economic and political dominance has eroded, relatively speaking. So I feel that era is upon us. It is important that we prepare ourselves for it. We place our case, our narratives, our values, heritage, in a sense, on the global stage. And this is, in a sense, you can say the new contestation.
The new contestation. Can I press you a little bit on that? Because if you look at the history of great empires, the Roman Empire, the British Empire, American exceptionalism since the Second World War, there is the economic aspect, naturally because of economic power. There is the military aspect, and then, as you said, there is this cultural aspect. How and why do you believe that is perhaps not paid enough attention to, or in the hard power game, people tend to forget that this is just as important a component, and why India is different, and what it has to offer is different from whatever we have seen in the narratives in the past?
I don't think people forget it. I think the smart people know it all the time. They just suppress it where other people are concerned. Look, what's the trick of the game? The trick of the game is to make myself look normal and you look an outlier. I won the game in the first move. So what has been happening? In the past, the West was supposed to be, modernity, progress. This is how we were all supposed to go. Now, when the nation state or the empires of the West started to decline, the game was reinvented. This time around, it was globalization. So now there's a global village. What's it? The world is flat. Now it's very interesting. When the world is flat, it's not like you listen to me. I'm supposed to listen to you.
Yeah.
You know. So you create now a kind of a global elite, which becomes, an arbiter. So I think this game of influence and shaping narratives and defining political correctness, according legitimacy, indulging in delegitimization, I think this is a very, very powerful part of how international relations is played. And in fact, I've devoted a large part of my book to that, which is, in a way, this is contest by other means. And it's very insidious, So half the time you don't even know this is happening, So when people start issuing reports of various kinds saying, you're really doing very badly. For example, press freedoms in India are so bad. By the way, I don't know if you know, they give Afghanistan a better rating than India. I hope at least as a journalist you'll be wounded by that.
Well, it certainly doesn't reflect the true realities. But when you say that this is a contest by other means, this is a contest that everybody plays, and it's open for us to play as well.
Everybody, sorry, Zakka, for interrupting. Everybody doesn't play it because a lot of people are not aware of it. A lot of people don't have the ability to play it. I think playing this itself is getting into the big league, that you will stand your ground. It could be earlier on, I scold you and you kind of are very defensive.
Yeah.
Today, if I scold you, you will push back.
Yes.
That's different. Maybe a day will come and you will scold me.
I don't know if I want to approach that from this prism, but you've recently come back from visits to Russia. You met with President Putin there. You've also more recently come back from a visit to Iran. Again, if you can explain to a layman who's watching this program, how do you, put your finger in all of these pies? On the one hand, you're being quoted by the West. We're strategic partners with the United States. And then you have, you had a visit to Iran, a very successful one, a very successful visit to Russia. And clearly, everybody knows the history between those countries and the West. So how does India position itself there?
I think today, I had first started writing about it in my earlier book. But the reality is much more visible in advance now. It's very important for us to be able to deal positively, productively with all the major power centers of the world, and also to have the maximum goodwill. So if you ask me in a way, what's your approach to the world, in a way it's not so complex. It's like any person would do in a society, which is have as many friends, have as many influential people who are with you, and that's what we are trying to do. Now, the world is competitive, international politics particularly so. So what happens is you come under pulls and pressures. Also, we have interests. Some countries are more responsive to it, some countries are less. Some would block our interests, some would advance our interests. So you are constantly playing this game of engaging multiple forces. Now, what happens with smaller countries is they do the same by hitching their stars to someone big who takes care, the price of the relationship is, look, you stay with me, I take care of your interests. And that's how the alliance culture has come about. There are others where there may be no alliance and they may not have that kind of relationship, and many of them, therefore, they continue, but their, I would say, zone of activity is relatively limited. Now, we are today the most populous country in the world, fifth largest economy, growing by every parameter that you can think of, with an increasing footprint in the world. So it's we can't take a modest view of our interests. I mean, our interests are increasingly expansive. So to do this, I must actually engage everybody. Now, it's a tricky thing because people have their own fights. So sometimes while doing your work, you walk into other people's fights. So you have to find ways of managing it. Now, sometimes we have our own interests too. I mean, you raised Iran in this case. I mean, when I went to Iran, one, of course, our own relationship with Iran is growing, and we have, been negotiating a long-term framework, long-term contract for Chabahar, because till now Chabahar has been running on a series of short-term contracts. And
can you explain why it's been delayed for so long? A lot of people have that, basic layman question. It's been hanging fire for.
What happened was we finalized a long-term contract in 2016, and then after we finalized it, the Iranians asked for a change. So, and then a lot of issues got reopened, and from 2016, it's been running on a short-term contract. All the while, people have been negotiating a long-term contract. So, my purpose of going there was to impress on them today that there is so much riding on the North-South corridor and on Chabahar port that we really need to make that push to get the long-term contract done. So we are not the guys holding it up. I mean, in fact, we had even concluded one at one point of time. But I think today there is a realization that we need to do it. So we have our own relationship with Iran on one side. But at the same time, we have also problems to discuss. I mean, there are today, attacks going on maritime shipping, both drone and missile attacks. And, endangering maritime shipping is a very, very dangerous game to play. And particularly, we've seen some attacks close to our waters. So I discussed it at some length, but I was, I think, fairly forthright about expressing our anxiety publicly when I was there. Also, when one looks at what is today really the number one issue in world politics, which is this whole fighting taking place in Gaza, they have their point of view, we have our point of view. They're not the same. They obviously laid theirs out, and I was equally, straight in expressing our point of view. So, I mean, a lot of diplomacy is, part of it is communication, but at the end of the day, a lot of it is finding those intersections. Because finally, I think Iran and India do share a lot. There we have a lot of common interests, and diplomacy is to, from a very amorphous sort of set of issues out there, you pick up the positive ones and kind of take that forward. Russia was a very different situation because, we've been under pressure for a few years now where our relationship with Russia is concerned, and we have stood our ground. And we've stood our ground primarily because strategically, I mean, as I tell people, just look at the map of the world. Look at this large landmass out there, and I think when you see the mapping of it, I think it makes sense why India and Russia would work closely together. And from our own point of view, I mean, ultimately, any call we will take with Russia will be based on our experiences, not on the experiences of other people. And those experiences have been largely positive.
I just want to talk about this Houthi Red Sea issue just for a moment, without the Iran lines or connections. But can you give us an assessment of what is the reading in South Block as to what the problem there is and how ships? I think there have been two instances of ships which are not Indian ships but had a lot of Indian crew, which were getting attacked in the Red Sea. And what are we doing about it?
No, we have multiple phenomena out there. We've had piracy, a resurfacing of piracy. So the Indian crew, to which the Indian our INS Chennai, I think, went in, that was a piracy issue.
Okay.
That's a different problem. These strikes, the drone strikes and the missile strikes, are a different problem. We both affect us, but the second one more, because it has started to divert shipping, and that has its costs.
Are you worried that that will lead to inflationary impacts on oil or other trade?
No, I mean, I would hope that, the, shall we say, sobriety and responsibility prevails, and some, this doesn't continue beyond a point.
I want to take one of the things that you mentioned in one of your previous answers. I'm taking my cue from that about small powers hitching themselves with big powers. We have seen recently this whole public sparring around the Maldives. What is your best understanding of what they have said about, Indian troops going out, and they've given a deadline supposedly?
No, look, every country has its politics, and when I'm now looking at it from an Indian perspective. As we look at the neighborhood, we have to factor in the political ups and downs in our neighborhood. So a large part of what we call our neighborhood first policy is how do you build a strong enough relationship structurally, societally, so that the impact of the ups and downs of politics are relatively mitigated. It's a very sensible thing to do. So if with countries, let us say, there's strong trade, there's energy flow, there is movement of people, there's, waterway traffic, depending on what it is, there is tourism. All these definitely give a certain ballast, a certain stability to the relationship. Now that said, there will be politics. We have been in discussions with the Maldives government. It's a fairly complicated matter because some of the platforms that are there are basically evacuation, medical medvac platforms. They've been of help to the public out there, and from what I can make out, the contribution of the platforms have been recognized. I think they seem to have some concern about the nature of people who operate those platforms. So we were discussing it. But we had this other problem, which in my view was, I would say, politics may be politics, but I think when people get into positions of responsibility, I think civility and courtesy are the least that you can expect. Unfortunately, in this case, that was wanting. But let us see. I think we continue our discussions with them.
I want to come to the concluding part, and I want to go back to where I started with the use of the Ramayana as a tent pole, looking at India's foreign policy. Two things. One, will you be going to Ayodhya for darshan?
Well, at some stage, yes, definitely.
Okay. And the second, is there, on a daily basis, you are dealing with multiple crises. Is there any reference, shloka, or story from either the Ramayana or the Mahabharata that you turn to, which gives you strength?
It's, to me, it's a lot of it is actually a kind of a wisdom, it is true in the Ramayana, it is true in the Mahabharata as well. Ramayana, in a way, because it is of an era where I would say there is a greater, the higher standards of conduct, I often, in talking to people, or sometimes talking to myself, think about, as you say, the analogous situation. So a lot of what I put in the book are examples which to me flowed very naturally, because this is what I cite to other people. saying, and it's very interesting. But once I started putting it to print, I discovered I was not unique. Others have used it. The idea of a Jatayu, for example, that someone willing to give up their life. I mean, the odds are against you, but you are willing to make a sacrifice for a larger cause. So I would urge you to treat this in a sense like an intellectual construct.
Okay. I have to play a round of rapid fire with you. You've always done that every time you've given me an interview. So, let's start. India or Bharat?
Bharat.
Bharat.
That India, that is Bharat.
India, that is Bharat. The India way or why Bharat matters?
Well, obviously, which came later.
Which came later?
Yes.
Why is that?
Bharat matters. I feel, look, our own debates in this period have evolved.
Okay. It's always that the second child has more love. In that sense.
I'm a second child myself.
Oh, you are? Okay. Yeah. When I say the words God and cricket, I know you're a big fan of cricket. Who's the first person that comes to mind?
In God or in cricket?
in both, I suppose.
No, cricket, you don't even want to get me started. Because,
okay.
it's very hard to pin down a name.
It's very hard to pin down a name.
It's very hard to pin down.
Because my next question was cricket or squash, because I know you play squash, or at least used to play quite regularly.
I still do.
You still do. So cricket or squash?
Well, for watching cricket, for playing squash.
And the final one, I've asked you this before, I know what your answer is, but I'm still going to ask you, are you contesting the upcoming Lok Sabha election?
I think you know my answer.
I said that.
You know my answer, which is a non-answer, and I think it will remain one.
All right. Anyway, thank you very much, Dr. Jaishankar, for this fascinating book, Why Bharat Matters, and for laying out an intellectual argument as to why we should be bound to our foundational ideals, our cultural and historic ideals. So thank you very much for this conversation.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.